Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. So last week we had a problem with the water supply to our house, and there was a leak outside. We had to get some guys out to fix it from Irish Water, and they did a great job. They fixed it. Everything was grand. The next day we find that the cold water taps in the house are not working. Now the mains was working, where the main supply comes in, the kitchen sink, that was working fine. But all of the cold water taps that run off the tank in the attic, none of them were working. So I went up into the attic and investigated, and sure enough, the tank was empty, totally empty. And the way it works is pretty much like the system of your toilet. There's a ball cock that, as the water level goes down, it drops down as well, and that opens up a valve that then refills the tank up with water. As the ball cock, it floats on top of the water, and as it goes up, it then shuts off the valve again, and that's how your cold water tank in your attic works. However, the problem was that for some reason, even though the ball cock had gone down, the water wasn't coming in. So I tried hitting the valve with a hammer and stuff like that, and that's about the extent of my plumbing expertise, and none of that worked. So in the end, I had to call a plumber. So a plumber came out, which I tell you what, getting a plumber is not easy at the moment. They're in great demand. But we got a plumber that came out, and he was good. He knew his stuff. He didn't charge us the earth, and he was able to fix the problem. And he showed me what the problem was. And he said this is quite common if you've had work done on your mains, is all it takes is for a little bit of dirt to get in, and it will block the valve. And he'd taken the valve apart, and he showed me, and it was he was tapping it against his hand, and the tiniest little stone, really just a piece of grit, fell out. He said that's what was blocking the water from filling your tank. And I'm looking at this really tiny thing, and I'm thinking, my goodness. And I said, well, how could something that small block it? He says, because the hole is really, really small. Because the water, the more pressure that there is behind water, the smaller the hole it needs to go through. And the hole in that valve is absolutely tiny. I could not believe it. But it caused me to reflect on a couple of things. First of all, it caused me to reflect on the fact that, as the Bible tells us, sometimes comparatively small things can have devastating consequences upon our lives. I think of Moses, who was denied the opportunity to enter into the promised land with the people of Israel for something that would seem quite small. The fact that whenever they needed a miracle and needed water to flow from the rock, instead of just speaking to the rock as he was commanded, he struck it with his stick as he had done on a previous occasion. And that small act of disobedience to the instructions God had given him meant Moses did not get to enter the promised land with the Israelites. But a small thing can make a huge difference. And that, with my plumbing, that tiny little stone, really just a piece of grit, was able to block the entire cold water supply for all the different taps and bath and everything else all around the house. But something else that I really had cause to reflect on to do with that was how water pressure is so powerful that it could, just through even the tiniest hole, it can fill an entire tank. And the wonderful thing is, rather than dwelling on the power of sin, I want to dwell on the power of God, because God's Holy Spirit can move through people who don't seem to be that impressive. I'm not talking about water coming through a massive pipe. I'm talking about a little tiny hole, and yet the water pressure can push through all the water that's needed to supply the cold water for our house. And in the same way, God's Holy Spirit can use the most unlikely of people. And I rejoice that I'm an unlikely person. I rejoice that it doesn't depend on how clever I am, doesn't depend on how strong I am, doesn't depend on how impressive my CV or my past experience is, but it's the power of the Holy Spirit, like the water pressure that can push through the tiniest of holes. The power of the Holy Spirit can do mighty things through ordinary people like you and me. And isn't that a glorious thing? Join us again next time for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.